You consider yourself to be a person of the grass, which is to say, a modern-day cowboy. Your assignment? To travel halfway across the world to teach cowboy skills to people in Russia and Kazakhstan. It might sound like a surreal and foreign quest, but as you immerse yourself in life on the steppe, you find yourself among absolute kindred spirits. You're listening to 2233, a podcast of exchange stories.
He didn't miss a beat. He didn't bat an eyelash that I was an American. He just saw me as a traveling horseman. And he himself is one, having migrated across the country from the south into the middle part of the steppe, where he could find land where it was cheap. So he too knew what it was like to be a traveler. And then once we got horseback, it was just synergy. We could just ride and ride. I just kind of blink my eyes and sometimes have to remind myself I wasn't just riding across Montana with another buddy.
This week, a calf named Ryan, horse wrestling, and a train journey the length of the globe. Join us on a journey from the plains of the American West to the steppes of Russia and Kazakhstan, and the making of cowboy comrades. It's 2233.
We report what happens in the United States, warts and all.
These exchanges shaped who I am.
When you get to know these people, they're not quite like you read about them. They are people very much like ourselves.
Oh, that's what we call cultural exchange. Ooh, yes.
My name is Ryan Bell. I'm from Washington State. I was a Fulbright National Geographic Storytelling Fellow in 2015 and 2016. That grant took me to Russia and Kazakhstan for a reporting project that I've really been working on since 2010. I call my project Comrade Cowboys. It's a reported story about the interaction between American ranchers and cowboys who are helping rebuild agriculture in the post-Soviet nations of Russia and Kazakhstan. I began in 2010 as a cowboy journalist, traveling with one of the first herds of cattle that were taken from the United States to a defunct collective farm in Russia. I was part of a team of, all told, about 10 cowboys who went over and back periodically for the period of a year. Our job was to see the cattle transplanted onto the Russian steppes, to help build the ranch, fencing and all, and to train a group of local villagers in the cowboy trade. The reason to go to all that trouble was because after the collapse of the Soviet Union, collective farming just went kaput and meat production ground to a halt. The cattle population in Russia alone, it dropped by almost 50%. So the Russian Federation launched a program called the Food Security Doctrine with the aim of becoming food secure, a real admirable effort. And this came during a period of time that was interesting between the U.S. and Russia. It was the reset. Vibes were good. The idea of plane loads of cattle and shiploads of cattle and cowboys showing up felt really warm. It was neat. And I reported on that for a cowboy magazine back in the U.S. It was a series called Comrade Cowboys. It was the ranchers and cowboys I knew in Montana and Colorado and Wyoming. They just ate it up. They loved it. This idea of almost time travel back to a time when the range was unfenced and things felt wild, and more that the cow is native to the steppe. The Russian Cossack is a revered figure in the West. Like they're cowboy brothers and sisters, and it's you just feel a kinship. So to get to travel over there and play cowboy with the Russians, everybody wanted to go do that. These were tough jobs to get. as a year or two went by after I'd come home, I kept thinking about that ranch and the baby cattle that we helped calve that winter and spring, wondering how they were doing. How were the villagers that we taught how to cowboy? How were they holding up? It's not an easy job. And for context, I'm a born-again cowboy. My grandpas were cowboys, but I was raised by baby boomers in the city. So when I had my chance after graduating from college with a history degree, I ended up working as a cowboy in Argentina. That was my first taste of the saddle. And it was the first time I realized that there's cowboys all over the world. They go by different names, but there's a kinship of the people of the grass. That experience proved to be great training for traveling to a place like Russia, where we did face serious hardships and significant cultural clashes. Still, what happened to the cattle? How did that ranch do? As a journalist, I needed to answer that question. This was a grand experiment. So as I was looking at the different programs, that was the second year they were offering the Fulbright National Geographic Storytelling Fellowship. And I thought, well, I can go back as a journalist. Through this fellowship, the National Geographic editors instantaneously recognized this for this stunning moment in history that it was, and fully embraced my reporting. So I got the fellowship, one of 5 people out of several hundred candidates. When I told my wife I got it, she goes, "Now, why didn't you apply to go somewhere warm?" As I was getting ready to go, we got some pre-training from the National Geographic editors, and I was working with a photo editor, and she was asking, like, what does this look like? What do the Russians look like? And, picturing big furry hats and long robes, and having been there already, knowing that actually they all dress in camouflage. They all dress in camouflage and black combat boots. That's a question I never asked. Why are you guys all dressed in camo? Like, do you just miss your military days? And there's a little bit of that, but there was more. Military clothing, it's a cheap way to clothe yourself. And these are individuals for whom they haven't had paying jobs for who knows how long. I spoke to one man an older man who hasn't had a paying job since the collective farm shut down in 1991. I also found through my research as a historian, as a history major, I couldn't help but dig into what the interaction has been like between Americans and Russians in agriculture for this whole time. And I found some stunning connections where there's been a transfer of customs between Russians and Americans going back 150 years. Even some recent examples in the height of the Cold War. The one that makes me laugh is rhinestone fashion. It was designed by a Russian emigre who came to the United States. And he was hired to make costumes that would be able to show off movement in black and white television. John Wayne, his favorite composer, was a Russian emigre. Many of the most famous, iconic Western songs, Red River, Bonanza, dun, 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 Bonanza, draws on musical traditions of Slavic cultures. We think of that as cowboy as it gets. So as I got to know some of these Russians and they would talk to me about my clothing, I would bring that up. Like, this all kind of comes from here, which they loved. That gave them a great sense of pride. It broke down that barrier of, oh, you're a cowboy. You got a hat on. You've got jeans with, curly Q embroidery on it. I don't wear rhinestones, but if I were wearing rhinestones, you've got all of this otherness. And in those discussions to realize that, no, in fact, that was a handoff. But it makes you realize that this interaction is one that goes back a long time. Somewhat timeless. So there I was, flying back to Russia 5 years later. I had a quest. I wanted to find the first baby calf that was born that winter in 2010. The veterinarian had nicknamed it Ryan. So I had a namesake calf somewhere in Russia, and darn it, I wanted to find that calf.
An old cowpoke went riding out one dark and windy day. Upon a ridge he rested as he went along his way. When all at once a mighty herd of red-eyed cows he saw, a-plowing through the ragged skies and up a cloudy draw.
And I knew that there was a good chance that perhaps this calf had entered the food chain and had long since become a hamburger, because that is the reality of what this was about. This was about feeding people. In fact, no, it didn't become a hamburger. It probably became meatballs inside of beef borscht or something of the local cuisine. Still, I wanted to know what path it had traveled.
A bolt of fear went through him as they thundered through the sky, for he saw the riders coming hard, and he heard their mournful cry.
So I landed back at the old ranch where a lot of the guys I had worked with were no longer there. There'd been significant turnover. The work is hard, and it's not uncommon on American ranches to see turnover, so that alone didn't surprise me. What was a little surprising was that because of that turnover, the new generation of workers on that farm, on that ranch, didn't practice the cowboy trades, the riding horses to gather the cattle, the things that we had taught that first class of Russian cowboy. And instead they had resorted to simple methods of doing their job. They were using tractors to round up the cattle, driving these big, huge tractors all over muddy pastures with grain inside the tractor because the cattle would follow it. And that's, we spent a day rounding up 250 head. 2 cowboys could do that with 2 horses and you'd be done. I felt let down. And that was hard to realize.
Trying to catch the devil's herd across these endless skies. Ghost riders in the sky.
It made me want to go find those guys I trained. I wanted to go find them. Like, why did you leave? What led you to leave? And is there any hope that you'll come back? Because this place needs you. Without you around, they're using tractors to round up cattle. My goodness. So I went and found one of the guys I'd worked with, a really talented young man. His story was interesting. Our first winter, he was a security guard because the ranch had to be gated. They were paranoid somebody would come steal these cattle. This young man and his dad were the security guards, and he kept leaving his post. In the middle of the night, we'd be at the barn because cattle tend to give birth just as the sun's going down because they know it's going to be difficult for you. No, not because of that. It's actually, it's biological. So during calving season, you kind of have to stay up all night long. So we'd be in the barn with just rows of baby calves, just cute as can be, slick, being licked off by their moms, and just a real nice moment. It's cold and snowy outside, but warm and steamy in the barn, and you can smell the hay, and it just feels like you're inside of a cow nursery. And this security guard, he kept coming. He would leave his post, and his little head would pop into the barn. And the cowboys would be like, "Who's guarding the gate?" And we were joking because nobody needed to guard the gate. Who are we kidding? Like the rancher joked, like, good luck whoever's going to try to steal these cattle. We could make a reality show out of that. Like, these are not going to be easy for you to steal. Like, you can just run in and steal a cow. leave his post and he'd come hang out with us. And the Russian farm manager, he considered this guy just a terrible problem. And we're like, this guy wants to be around these cattle. He's got a real fondness for it. And the thing about cowboys is we love our job. There's a disconnect among cowboys. You know you're raising food. We all eat steak. We all eat hamburger. But you're caring for the life and the well-being of a animal, a beautiful one at that, with a lot of personality. You develop a real sweetness for it. And you have to apply that to the job because they're frustrating buggers. They're going to make you mad. So it's kind of like a child. You've got to have love for it to see yourself through that. Otherwise, they'll just drive you crazy. And that's one of the reasons I found out a lot of those first cowboys ended up quitting. Victor was the first time we saw a guy whose heart quickened when he was around the cattle. He wanted nothing more to do that. So us cowboys lobbied the farm manager to assign him as a cowboy in training, and we did. And he proved pretty darn talented at the job. We had to teach him how to ride a horse. We had to teach him how to use a gate. The idea of a gate in a country where there's no fences. In the West, you grow up around them. You grow up understanding the customs around a fence. There's cardinal rules. When you come to a gate, you leave it however you found it because somebody has it set a specific way. If it's open, it's because maybe there's cattle you don't see way far off that they want to slowly but surely trickle their way through that gate into a new pasture on their own without you needing to do a thing. Maybe that's why the gate's open. Or if it's closed for a darn good reason. If you don't know those things, how do you know what to do with the gate? And a lot of these workers would just shoot themselves in the foot with leaving gates open when they shouldn't. We'd be moving cattle from out of the barn and we'd go into this pasture and I'd think, oh, they finally did it right. They were herding the cattle from behind because their first instinct was hysterical. They'd jump in front of the cow, in front of the face. I'm like, no. My first Russian word I learned was ticha, quiet, ticha. Which we later found out some guys thought we were basically telling them to shut up. Like, we don't want you to talk. Bad moment of translation. No, quiet yourself. And move them from behind. Get behind them and move them forward. You know, we have foremans in the West who yell and shout and are jumpy, and their cattle are flighty, jumpy, and hard to work with. Whereas if you work with a foreman who's got a smoothness and a calmness, the cattle show that same behavior. So we're teaching them to get behind the cattle, be quiet, ticha. They finally get the idea. And we'd move them into a pasture. And then we'd watch as the cows go through the pasture to the other side and right out a gate somebody had left open into a part of the ranch that wasn't fenced from there to the Ukraine. And the workers would just be demoralized. And we'd have to go get them again, spend the rest of the day, fixing that mistake. Victor was one of these guys we had taught to do all of that. And more, he could lead other Russians, other villagers to do all of this because they listened to him. They esteemed him. It was no longer an American telling them, hey, this is the way we do it, ticha. No, it's Victor saying, we do it this way. No, we don't do it like it's a dairy farm. We do it this new way. And he was really effective at transmitting that knowledge across his peer group. So when I left after that first year, I was asking our veterinarian, she was bilingual, she was Russian, and I asked her, why Victor? Why was he so much better than the others? She said, well, his last name translates as cattleman, Korovkin. And yet he doesn't know why his last name was Cattleman. He doesn't know his family history, like most people don't. He can't look farther back than 1917. His dad, I talked to his dad, doesn't know. Doesn't even know what his grandfather's history was. They just don't know. This region is the region of the Don Cossack, the great historical Cossack of the Russian Empire. They ruled the steppes. They were fantastic cowboys. And the Bolshevik Revolution did not go well for them. It's possible that Victor's family descends from that, and they just don't know what that lineage is. It seems to me he's just got it coded inside of his DNA. An instinct for this work and a passion for it that just came back to life, and he was good at it. And in going to find Victor, I was hoping to bring the Russian cowboy back to the Russian ranch. So I found him, and he was living with his family, and he had a new wife, and they had a baby child, and I think they might have had 2, and life had just gotten really busy for him. And it was easier for him to just work in the village. Those are the same forces we deal with in the West. This is universal. On the upside, there was a new farm manager, and he wanted to learn how to do all things cowboy. He was embarrassed that they used tractors. He says, "Yes, finally, someone you could teach us to rope, teach me how to be a cowboy." And he wanted to be number one. I would teach him, he would teach the others, and we would spend the days. I taught him everything because the horses were still there. They hadn't been used in a year or two, so they'd grown half wild. So I had to do kind of some retraining. That was a little bit Western. And then teach him along the way, and he picked it up. By the time my visit there ended, he was doing well. He was riding. He had some other people riding with him. They were doing it the Cossack way, the cowboy Cossack way. Ryan the calf wasn't there. Ryan the calf got sold. That was kind of the plan. This ranch, the plan wasn't to raise all these cows to slaughter for meat, because that would be kind of pointless. Spend all this money bringing all these cattle over to Russia and then just slaughter them right away. These were breeding animals. So Ryan was sold as a breeding bull in a group of cattle that, as far as I can tell, were shipped to a buyer in Kazakhstan. The same situation in Russia occurred in Kazakhstan with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Farms shut down, cattle herds, sheep herds, all meat-producing animals, all their populations kind of diminished. So they were also importing livestock. And I'd wanted to go to Kazakhstan. Ryan proved to be a fantastic excuse to bridge and go over and see how this same thing had played out in Kazakhstan. Through this journey, I saw for the first time how diverse the Soviet Union must have been. How intermixed. Growing up, I grew up in Colorado Springs, which is like a military town, and it was rumored among us classmates in elementary school that, we're the first person that gets nuked by the commies. Like, the first missile's coming here, to blow up the bases or something. Like, we just grew up with this fear of the huge, ubiquitous Russia, Soviet Union, USSR. It hadn't occurred to me that these were autonomous people and countries previous to the Russian Revolution. So to cross this boundary into Kazakhstan and see how quickly the culture shifted, how quickly the landscape shifted. I also knew that thanks to some recent archaeology discoveries in Kazakhstan, some of the original domesticated horses were in Kazakhstan. Pastoral traditions go way, way back in Kazakhstan. So as a cultural cowboy, it was like traveling back to the wellspring of my traditions. I wasn't able to locate exactly where Ryan was sold to, but I could guess. I just knew that a batch of cattle had been sold to a specific ranch kind of in the central steppe of Kazakhstan. I followed the trail to where they had also sold some more cattle to another rancher. So kind of lily-padding between startup ranch to startup ranch, I landed at this one ranch called King's Gate Ranch. It was a ranch that was started under the Soviet Union. It was a big old sheep farm. And it was now being run by a young man, a young rancher named Daulet Shaitapov. Daulet was a young man who was just cowboy crazy. He had a smartphone. He'd flip through, he'd see pictures. He knew all about this. He traveled to the U.S., had visited ranches. He had a passion to build this ranch from the viewpoint of being a young ranching owner, something that could last for a really long time. Something that was immediately different in Kazakhstan, once I was among people who aren't that far removed from their nomadic traditions, is a level of hospitability I had seen in Argentina, I've seen in Mexico, I've seen wherever you have people of the grass. Because when you travel for long distances on a frontier, it's a prerequisite of just human dignity that you welcome a traveler. There's even rules in Kazakhstan, cultural rules, that you have to give food and shelter to even your enemy if they come to your door. They would willingly seek refuge in somebody of a different tribe if they needed to, because you can't be caught out on the steppe, you'll die. And so it was a human dignity they afforded to even somebody they would war with. I think that's at the root of why Daulet was so welcoming to me. In all my travels, I'd never come into contact with the Muslim culture. What exposure I've had has been through television, sensationalized. So on the first morning on Daulet's ranch, I was in the bunkhouse where almost all of his cowboys, all of his herdsmen were sleeping. And I heard somebody doing prayers at like 5 a.m. It woke me up. And I had like a panic reflex. I didn't like that. It was just a knee-jerk reaction. And it made me realize how conditioned I have been to this idea that should be alarming, which is ridiculous. I grew up in a church. I have many pastors and ministers in my family. I sang in church choir. I've been raised in such a way that faith is never something to be taken as alarming. So that was my response to this man praying was a sign that I had a blind spot Also, I'm on a ranch in the absolute middle of nowhere. When you're that far out there, you have to learn to get along with anybody that you are around. So I got to know this man, and he was an Uzbek worker who had come to Kazakhstan. And in Kazakhstan, they're Muslim. They're a little bit more lifestyle Muslim than full-on practicing. And it was really only this one Uzbek individual who would pray, and he was super faithful about it, and he was so kind and gentle. And so I asked Dowlett, who was kind of my interpreter of all things Kazakh, and he considered himself culturally Muslim. I asked him, some of my biggest fears. What's it like with the conflict in Syria for you guys? What's it like with the rise of the Islamic State? What's this like? And so we ended up having a conversation like you'll have on a lot of ranches where in the West, where people are Christian, and many of them are quite faithful, many of them are not. I worked on a ranch where all the cowboys were Mormon, and we would spend Sundays after they'd come home from their church, and we would spend, we'd have barbecues together, and discussions of faith were never far behind. So here we were having one of those discussions of faith, and I asked him, how do you remedy these differing things? And he told me something I had never known. He told me that to a Muslim, they consider Jesus Christ, a prophet. I didn't know that. I didn't know that he was recognized as a prophet. That created a feeling of a bridge. If you can identify a spiritual individual who's important to me as a prophet of your own, there's no reason I can't see your prophets as prophets of my own. It destigmatized it, and it felt freeing. A lot of the guys would ask me about rodeo. They all were fascinated by rodeo. But they also wanted to show me their equestrian games because the Kazakhs have a ton of them. And they're pretty good horsemen. They're born on these horses. And they've handed down some games, some sports that are just fascinating. So they wanted to teach me one of these games. I was quite interested in this game called Kokpar, which I can only describe as, it's like rugby, but with the body of a dead goat. It's incredibly brutal. They served a purpose back in who knows when as a way to train warriors. But this one man in the South wanted to make this sport accessible to visitors from out of the country. It's like, I think people might enjoy watching this game. And I'm like, good luck with that. But to that end, he had helped devise a new league with players, with teams with uniforms, and instead of a carcass of a dead goat, they had created a bag, like a leather bag filled with sand, and where you would have arms and legs of a goat, they had these knotted ropes. The appearance is a whole lot nicer watching this game, and he wanted me to play. Like, come on, let's play. We'll put on a match. Well, this is still, no matter what, even though it's just this big, heavy 70-pound leather bag, it's full on. I grew up playing ice hockey, and this is like checking, hitting, but on horseback. Like, you are in a fight for your life, and it is not easy. And the gameplay, there's set moves, and it reminds me, you throw picks like you do in basketball. And so even though I could ride just fine, I was useless out there on this field. And so they stopped the game kind of partway through it, and it was fun. It was a good taste, and we would play again several days later, but they're like, let's do something maybe you can do. We'd like to have you play horse wrestling. And what this is two horsemen holding each other, basically try to rip the other person off of their horse. That's the entire game. And they handicap it. Like, they put you with somebody of your own ability. And so they looked at me, and then they looked at this 60-year-old guy with gold teeth. And they're like, I think you're probably his level. So I'm squaring off against Grandpa. And we lock arms, and the horses get it because you're sitting there trying to yank the person off of the horse, and at the same time, you're having to control your own horse. And he's got techniques for like doubling his horseback so that next thing I know, he's got my arm wrapped around behind me, and he's yanking me out of the saddle. And my feet are getting caught in the stirrups, and I'm about to go, and they keep telling me, fight back, fight back. I'm like, this feels like it's over. Like, someone hand me a white towel. I got to throw it in. And the old man with gold teeth mercilessly just lets me gently fall to the ground. And everybody clapped. They applauded. They were very kind to not utterly humiliate me. But it was a humbling experience thinking that here, you know, us cowboys are coming to show these guys a thing or two. Let's show you how to cowboy. And okay, let's teach you how to horse wrestle. Put me in my place so fast. I mean, they all ask you, do you play the guitar? They've got it in their mind what a cowboy looks like. It's the singing cowboy, and that's a Hollywood portrayal. And not that cowboys don't play the guitar, but we don't lope along, you know, don't just ride our pony across the desert where no grass grows. Why is a cowboy out in the desert? That makes no sense, but he's singing a song and he's not sweating. Just don't get me started on Hollywood cowboy. But that's their impression, and I play the guitar and I sing because there's something about the cowboy life that lends itself to a cadence. Just the lonesome experience of the life, you entertain yourself. So a cowboy tradition took root a long time ago. It's taken shape into cowboy western music. And I'm a musical person, so I wanted to find out about their music too. So we'd do song swaps. They would play, they had these really cool 2-string guitars called a dombra, and I became obsessed with it. It's a real rhythmic, strumming type of music. And there's all these set tunes, and it's all based on rhythm. They will sing with some of the tunes, but the story I was told is that the dombra, the music form, was born one time when a performer was playing a musical representation of a deer hunt, of the act of hunting a deer, and so and then also of the horses running and the rhythm and the beats. And it struck me just so similar to the fingerstyle guitar I had learned in Argentina, where they have a little bit of a lot of a Spanish influence. And so seeing them strumming and striking this little 2-string guitar, it just instantaneously felt like I was in Argentina again. And they'd hand it to me, and, you know, highly doubting my ability to play this thing. But I didn't know how to really fret the thing, but I could get the strumming down, and they were delighted. They were absolutely delighted that I could, you know, at least imitate a little bit what they were performing with that music. So when I was getting ready to leave Kazakhstan at the end of my grant, I was with Dowlett's family, and they're a gift-giving culture. You can't out-gift a Kazakh. Like, they are going to out-gift you. So I'm a traveler. I didn't have a whole lot with me, but I wanted to leave something meaningful, especially for Dalit, though I had also become close with the rest of his family. And I've been carrying along with me a cowboy hat, a black felt cowboy hat that I've worn on reporting trips to Mongolia, to Argentina. This cowboy hat's been with me for a long, long time. So I thought, I think I can give up this hat. I'll give this hat to Dalit. So I gave it. And it was a pretty powerful moment. Big hugs and the whole bit. But he said, "How old are you, Ryan?" And I told him my age at the time, and he said, "Okay, well, that doesn't matter." He said, "We have a custom that at certain ages, at certain birthdays, you're to shed your most meaningful belongings, to hand them, to give them to people who are important to you, as a sign, as a signifier of entering a new phase of your life so that you can acquire new things that are important to you." So he said, "You didn't even realize it. You're being as Kazakh as can be right now." And I appreciated that. About a year later, he was featured on a TV show. Vice had made a TV show about Kazakhstan ranching, and there was Dalit galloping across his ranch wearing that black felt hat. It was pretty cool. When I went on this trip, my wife and my daughter stayed in Washington State, and my wife just was terrified that I would die in a plane crash. So I made a promise to her that in all my travels, I would never take an airplane. I stayed true to that, and at the end of the trip, I added up all the mileage that I traveled by train, and it equaled 25,000 miles, which is the exact circumference of the Earth. It's like riding a train around the Earth. And seeing the countryside by train, I mean, how romantic is that? The train holds a fascinating spot in pretty much any culture because it just revolutionized their way of life. And I'm a big Russian literature fan, and so it brings to mind Anna Karenina and just these journeys people would make by train and by rail, and you see a side of Russia, holy cow, that is just so authentic. These birch tree forests that are just, they're haunting and hallowed, and all of a sudden in a gray landscape, you'll see a house painted orange, and some little old lady with a wool shawl around her neck, shoveling out her front porch, or somebody skiing through the woods to go do who knows what. And those were in the wintertime, and then in the summertime, you'd see people emerging from their banyas, their sauna houses, and then you'd come to these cities that appear out of nowhere in clear-cut forests that have, run-down power plants around them, and it's exactly what you would think a post-Soviet industrial city would look like. And then you cruise through a city that's been around for 800 years and see these gorgeous churches and these walls, and seeing that country by rail felt like a good stand-in for what it would be like to see it by horse. And then with the rhythm, the ticka-donk, 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 ticka-donk of a rail car passing over the tracks just lulled me to sleep.
.2233 is produced by the Collaboratory, an initiative within the U.S. State Department's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, better known as ECA. My name's Christopher Wurst. I'm the director of the Collaboratory. 2233 is named for Title 22, Chapter 33 of the U.S. Code, the statute that created ECA. And our stories come from participants of U.S. government-funded international exchange programs. This week, Ryan T. Bell shared stories from his time as a Fulbright National Geographic Fellow, teaching cowboy skills to eager people of the grass in Russia and Kazakhstan. Ryan's amazing work can be seen at ryantbell.com. For more about the Fulbright and other ECA exchange programs, check out eca.state.gov. We encourage you to subscribe to 2233. You can do so wherever you find your podcasts. And hey, while you're there, why not leave us a nice review, huh? And we'd love to hear from you. You can write to us at ecacollaboratory@state.gov. That's ecacollaboratory@state.gov. Did you know that photos of each week's interviewee and complete episode transcripts can be found on our webpage at eca.state.gov/2233. Huge, very special thanks this week to Ryan for his passion and stories. My colleague Anna Maria Sinatine and I did the interview. I edited it. Featured music was No 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 No's and Lullaby for Democracy by Dr. Turtle. Riders in the Sky, the Cowboy Legend by Vaughn Monroe and his orchestra. File Sharer's Lament by Blanket Music. The Dreamers Instrumental by Josh Woodward. And huge special thanks to Ryan for 2 actual field recordings of his Kazakh cowboy comrades playing the dombra. Music at the top of each episode is Sebastian by How the Night Came, and the end credit music is 2 Pianos by Tagir Lius. Until next time.